A recent review in the British Medical Journal notes that most people are not very good at quarantine. An exception, it says, may be academics, enthralled at the idea of being able to write papers in self-isolation, and it is amazing how quickly they can work under such conditions. Could this be our moment, all alone with our dissertations, revision notes and articles? Does self-isolation finally give us the space we needed to come into our own as students and scholars, finding ourselves, as we more than likely failed to do when we last had an opportunity to go looking on our gap year? Some people have the hermit instinct. The novelist E.M. Forster describes his character Tibby's interview for Oxford when the students are away on vacation. He understood it all the better because it was empty. Oxford is Oxford, not a mere receptacle of youth like Cambridge. He made no friends. His Oxford remained Oxford empty. Tibby's experience no doubt resonates with some of us, whether Oxford empty is to us lovely or lonely, civilization without activity. My guess is that most of us, academics and all, find social distancing and isolation at least strange and at worst intolerable. No man is an island entire of itself. He was never meant to be. God always said it is not good that the man should be alone. However self-sufficient we may be, belonging assumes membership of a group, a college, a nation, and the human family. Separation, especially enforced separation, threatens to alter our very sense of self. Solitary confinement is psychological punishment. A baby that never gets held gives up crying and surrenders to despair. I think that's why we find it so distressing to hear of patients dying alone in hospital beds and of funerals without mourners. Without people they know and love around them, an important part of who they are and what their lives have meant is excluded from the room. In Italy, they were trying to return the personal possessions of the dead to their families, kept in red plastic bags. A tin of cookies, a mug, pyjamas, slippers, but now they simply don't have time. One more statistic. We understand, of course, that this is necessary. The hospitals are where you're most likely to pick up coronavirus. We don't want to catch it ourselves. Coming out of the pharmacy last week, a woman held the door open for an old man. "Keep away from me," he barked, angry, yet more afraid. The virus changes how we relate. We are being sensible, cautious, fearful. God forbid we also become unkind. Our impetus to stay in touch online reflects our shared love of connection and enjoyment of each other. Also implicit is the threat isolation poses. To leave people isolated is somehow inhumane. As Lord Byron wrote, "The last, the sole, the dearest link between me and the eternal brink, which bound me to my failing race, was broken in this fatal place." At 3:00 in the afternoon, when Jesus of Nazareth was hanging on a cross, one of the few things we know that the onlookers said was, "Leave him alone." Alone is how Jesus faced death, abandoned. It was inhuman. That was exactly the point. COVID-19 feels like a plague of biblical proportions. Arguably, the ultimate plague in Scripture is neither frogs, nor hailstones, nor locusts, but an affliction of the heart. Back in Sunday school, the easy acronym for Sin 101 was Shove Off God, I'm in charge, No to Your Rules. S-I-N. The first of these, shoving off, brings us close to the idea of social distancing. Like a virus, spiritual contagion forces separation. It drives us apart from one another, and reluctantly, God must take a big step back too. Remember Adam and Eve expelled from paradise. Think of Cain driven from the face of the earth. In the book of Ezekiel, God clears out of his own desecrated temple. In Leviticus, even the defiled land vomits out her inhabitants. Social distancing is the characteristic response to something so deadly. Who am I in isolation? I have no way of knowing. And the eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. My mother was one of few Brits today to have been born in a leper colony. Her parents worked there in West Africa. Almost as bad as the skin lesions, nerve damage and disfigurement is the way leprosy produces social outcasts. They were shunned, not only as diseased but as spiritually unclean, living outside the camp, practically subhuman. It was remarkable in the first century that Jesus reached out his hands to lepers and touched them. He ignored social distancing rules, which we all know is mad, unless, of course, your proximity will have a curative effect. The disease was gone, and the person could rejoin society. Jesus went out so that the leper could come in. On Good Friday, Jesus carried his cross outside of the city. The bystanders stood back. Roman crucifixion was intentionally degrading. They would have understood what has been lost to us. To be crucified was to be less than human, stigmatized, no longer a member of the human race. Jesus died alone in a way that no human being has ever been so completely alone. My God, he cries, why have you forsaken me? The early Christians saw significance in this isolation. Jesus became the leper, taking our place in spiritual quarantine and experiencing the full dehumanizing effect of isolation from God. Scientists say COVID-19 will kill hundreds of thousands of people. There is as yet no cure. Scripture warns that Sin 101 will kill everyone eventually, but there is hope. We would never have heard of Jesus Christ if the lepers he touched had remained sick. His death would be another statistic if he had not risen again. He opened his arms wide on the cross, reaching out to us all. Love finds a way to reconnect. You who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ, wrote St. Paul. We were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. Finding ourselves in isolation means we are alone. Being found in isolation means we are not. On the third day, the quarantine is over. As the Queen said recently, we will meet again. The good news of Easter is atonement, at one munt. News that brings us together. that distancing is no